Daniel had seen many patients during his time as a volunteer paramedic, but there was something different about the young woman who came into the clinic that cold evening. It had just stopped raining, and the last light of day was fading behind the gray hills when she was wheeled in by a concerned hiker and a park ranger. Her face was pale, her brown hair sticking to her forehead from sweat and rain. Her left shoulder was twisted at an odd angle, and there were bruises along her arms, some fresh, some fading. "Fell on the trail," the ranger explained. She didn't want to call for help, but her hiking partner insisted. She said her name was Marin. Daniel nodded and gently checked her collarbone, wincing as he felt the fracture. She barely made a sound, only drawing in a short breath when he touched the worst spot. Her eyes stayed low. She didn't cry. She didn't even look angry or scared. Just quiet. "You're lucky," he said, trying to be light. "Could have been worse." She gave a small nod but didn't smile. As they worked to stabilize her shoulder and wrap her bruises, Daniel asked a few simple questions. How had she fallen? How long had she been hiking? Where was she staying? "I was looking for a place to clear my head," she said softly. "Slipped on a rock near the ridge." She didn't give many details. When asked about family, she said they were far away. When asked about her hiking partner, she only replied, "He left after I said I'd be fine." Daniel had learned not to push. Some people didn't want to talk. Still, something about her story felt incomplete. Not in a suspicious way, but in a heavy, quiet kind of way, like she was carrying more than just the pain in her bones. He handed her a painkiller, which she accepted without protest, and gave instructions for her to visit the small rehab center in town. Before she left, she looked up at him just once. Her eyes were a deep gray, like storm clouds that hadn't quite passed. "Thanks," she said. That was it. Over the next few days, Daniel thought about her more than he expected to. He tried to brush it off. It wasn't unusual to remember a patient with unusual injuries, especially one who looked so lost in her own thoughts. But then she appeared again. It was a Thursday afternoon, about a week after the fall, when Daniel spotted her at the local cafe. She was sitting alone by the window, one arm still in a sling, typing on a small laptop. She wore a loose sweater and had her hair tied up messily. Her coffee had gone cold. She hadn't touched the muffin on her plate. Without thinking much, he walked in and ordered his usual. On his way out, he nodded in her direction. "Good to see you up and around," he said. She looked up, blinked like she hadn't noticed anyone enter the whole time, then gave a short smile. It was faint, but it was there. "I'm healing," she replied. Slowly. Daniel didn't want to intrude, so he simply smiled back and left. But from that day on, he saw her more often, always alone, always with the same quiet look. She went to the rehab center like he'd advised, and the therapist mentioned she followed all instructions perfectly, almost too perfectly. She did everything right, but kept to herself. No small talk, no questions. Sometimes Daniel saw her, walking the quiet trail near the lake. Other times she sat by the cafe window, staring at her screen, her fingers barely moving. Once she stayed for hours, long after most people had come and gone. One evening, Daniel was locking up the clinic when he spotted her again, this time sitting outside on a bench with her coat pulled tight around her. "Cold evening," he said. She nodded. "I like the cold. It makes things feel real." He didn't know what that meant, but he sat down beside her anyway. They talked for a while, about nothing important. Weather, the town, the sound of birds in the morning. She still gave short answers, but this time her voice was warmer, softer. "Most people come here for the mountains," Daniel said, "but I don't think that's why you're here." She glanced at him, then looked away. "No," she whispered, "it's not," and then she said nothing else. In the following weeks, their paths crossed more often. Slowly, a fragile connection began to grow. Daniel never pushed her to talk about her past. He just made sure she knew he was there, offering her extra sugar for her coffee, recommending a good book, helping carry her groceries once. She accepted the kindness, but always kept a certain distance. Not rude, just careful. Yet every time Daniel saw her, he noticed the same thing. The bruises were fading, but the silence stayed. The way she flinched at sudden noises, the way she checked the shadows before walking home, the way she sat with her back to the wall whenever she entered a room. She hadn't just fallen, that much was clear, but Daniel didn't say anything. He waited. Not because he wanted answers, but because he wanted her to feel safe whenever she was ready. And so the days passed, slow and quiet. A broken collarbone was healing. The town's cold wind began to shift towards spring. And the woman, with the bandaged wrists, the silent eyes, and the secrets she wouldn't speak, remained a mystery. But Daniel had a feeling she wasn't here to stay lost forever, not this time. The little town was quiet, the kind of place where people noticed when someone new came around. Marin had now been there for a few weeks, long enough for the locals to start wondering who she was, and long enough for her to become part of the town's quiet routine. Every morning, Marin walked to the same cafe, sat at the same corner table by the window, and ordered a single cup of coffee. Black, no sugar. Sometimes she brought her laptop, sometimes a notebook, but most days she just sat, looking out at the street. She rarely made phone calls, never had visitors. She spoke politely to the waitress, but never started conversations. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself stopping by the cafe more than he used to. He told himself it was for the coffee, or to grab a sandwich before his shift, but deep down he knew he was hoping to see her. Marin had a way of sitting still, like she was trying to disappear into the air around her. But even in silence, there was something about her that made people notice. It became a quiet habit between them. He would wave or nod if he saw her, and she would return it with a small smile. A simple connection, nothing more. Yet slowly, without either of them saying it, they began to share the same space in small ways. One afternoon, Daniel saw her sitting on a bench in the town square, a sketch pad in her lap. He paused before approaching, not wanting to disturb her. "You draw?" he asked. She glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Not very well," he smiled. "Can I see?" She hesitated, then turned the page toward him. It was a sketch of the mountain range. Simple pencil, strokes, soft and careful. The lines weren't perfect, but the image felt alive, like she'd captured the wind and quietness of the place. "It's beautiful," he said honestly. She didn't smile, but her cheeks turned a little pink. "I used to draw a lot, stopped, for a while." "Why?" She looked down at her lap. Life got in the way. That was all she said. The more time Daniel spent near her, the more he realized how guarded she was. She never mentioned friends, never spoke of where she came from. She never laughed out loud or raised her voice. But once in a while, her eyes softened and a little light came through. At the clinic, one of the nurses asked Daniel about her. "Is she okay?" they whispered. "She always looks like she's watching for something." Daniel didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself, but he noticed it too, the way Marin's body tensed when someone spoke too loudly, or how she sat, near exits in public places, always alert. It wasn't fear exactly, it was more like she was always ready to leave. One evening, Daniel saw her standing near the lake just before sunset. The water was still, glowing gold under the fading sky. He didn't mean to disturb her, but she turned before he could walk away. "Hey," she said quietly. "You come here often?" "Sometimes," he replied. "Nice place to think." She nodded and looked back at the lake. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "I used to come to places like this as a kid, before things got complicated." He glanced at her, but she didn't explain. "I feel safe here," she added after a pause. "Like the world moves slower." Daniel understood that. Feeling well. Life in their town wasn't loud or fast. It didn't ask too many questions. It let people breathe. They talked for a while, mostly about the town. He told her stories about his early days as a paramedic, funny moments, strange calls, and how he once had to help a goat that got its head stuck in a fence. She chuckled softly at that. "That poor goat," she said. That was the first time. He heard her laugh, even a little. From that evening on, they spoke more often. Not every day, but enough. Sometimes they shared a bench at the park. Other times they walked the trail near the woods, saying little but enjoying the quiet. Marin started asking small questions about the town, about his work, about his favorite books. She never shared much in return, but Daniel didn't mind. He was patient. One day, while walking back from the grocery store, Marin dropped her bag. A small photo fell out, and Daniel instinctively picked it up before she could. It showed Marin in a white dress, standing beside a man in a suit. The background looked like a wedding venue, though the picture had been ripped in half. Her face changed the moment she saw him holding it. She reached out quickly and took it back. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, feeling awkward. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," she said quickly, tucking it into her coat pocket. But her hands were shaking. Daniel didn't ask about it. He didn't need to. That night, he thought about the photo, about the sadness that always lingered behind Marin's quiet smiles. She wasn't just healing from a broken bone. Something deeper had hurt her. Something that left scars no doctor could see. The next time they met, she didn't bring up the photo. Instead, she asked if he liked music. "I play guitar," he said. "Mostly for myself. Helps me think." "Will you play something for me sometime?" she asked. He looked at her in surprise. "Sure." She smiled again. This time it reached her eyes. Bit by bit, her walls were lowering. Not all the way, not yet. But Daniel could feel it. She wasn't just passing time here anymore. She was beginning to let the town, and maybe him, into the quiet parts of her life she had kept hidden for too long. And even though the reasons for her silence were still locked away, Daniel felt that something important was coming. Something that would explain it all. But for now, he was just glad she stayed. It had been nearly 2 months since Marin came to the quiet mountain town, and by now people had stopped asking about her. She had blended into the background, like the mist that clung to the hills in the morning. There, but not demanding attention. Daniel, though, never stopped noticing. They didn't meet every day, but their connection had grown. The talks were easier now. She still chose her words carefully, but the space between them was no longer filled with hesitation. Sometimes she even made gentle jokes. And once she surprised him by bringing a small blueberry pie she had baked herself. "You cook now?" he teased, and she smiled in that shy way he'd grown fond of. "I follow instructions well," she replied. "The crust is a little hard, though." It wasn't. It was perfect. The bruises on her arms had faded, and the sling was gone. Her steps were steadier. She had started exploring more, visiting the library, shopping at the weekend market, even chatting briefly with the old man who sold wild honey from his truck. Slowly, Marin was becoming part of the town. But Daniel knew better than to assume that healing on the outside meant healing on the inside. One day, heavy rain poured over the town, and the roof of the small storage room at the clinic started leaking. Daniel offered to help the landlord check on the other buildings they rented, including a quiet little cottage on the edge of the woods. Marin's cottage. "She's been renting it since she got here," the landlord said as he unlocked the door. "Always pays on time, keeps to herself." Daniel didn't intend to go inside. He just wanted to make sure everything was okay. But when they stepped into the cottage, the air inside felt oddly still, like the place had been paused mid-breath. The front room was clean and neat. Books stacked on the table, a blanket draped. Over the sofa, a pair of muddy hiking shoes near the door. "She's not home?" Daniel asked. "No, probably out. Wants her privacy, that one." They began checking the ceiling for signs of leaks. Everything seemed fine, except for a slight drip near the back. The landlord left to grab tools, leaving Daniel alone for a few minutes. As he walked through the small hallway, he passed a door that stood slightly open, probably a bedroom or storage space. He peeked in just to be sure there were no leaks there either. What he saw stopped him. It was a small room barely larger than a walk-in closet. Inside, there was a closed box sitting neatly on the floor. What caught Daniel's attention wasn't the box itself, but the label stuck to it. A single word written in careful handwriting, "Someday." He didn't mean to be nosy, but something about that word made him pause. Someday. It didn't sound like something you used for storage or old clothes. It sounded like hope, or maybe regret. Curious, but still respectful, Daniel knelt down and gently opened the lid. Inside, folded neatly, was a wedding dress. He froze. It was simple and elegant. White lace, soft silk, no glitter or shine. The kind of dress someone would choose if they didn't want a show, just a promise. Next to the dress, there were a few envelopes. One of them was a handwritten note titled "My Vows." Another was a list of names, clearly a guest list. His eyes scanned it, and his breath caught when he saw the first name at the top. Maren. There was another name beside hers, but it had been crossed out with a thick black line. Daniel gently put everything back, his hands steady but his mind racing. He closed the box, stood up, and backed out of the room. He felt like he had just stepped into a moment that didn't belong to him, a memory someone had tried to pack away. When Maren returned that evening, she found Daniel sitting on her porch, waiting with 2 cups of coffee in hand. She looked surprised but not upset. "Hey," she said, unlocking the door. "Hey." "I was helping the landlord check the leak," he explained. "He said the rain's been giving your roof some trouble." She nodded and took the coffee from him. "Thanks." They sat quietly for a while, listening to the wind in the trees. Daniel didn't bring up the box. Not yet. "You okay?" he asked softly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared into the trees, her expression thoughtful. "I used to think I was going to get married," she said finally. Daniel turned his head toward her but didn't speak. "I bought a dress," she continued. "Planned the whole thing, picked flowers, made a playlist, even tried to write vows." He stayed quiet, giving her space. It didn't happen. Life changed. He changed, and so did I. Her voice didn't shake, but there was a tightness behind. Her words, like they were tied to something deeper. "I kept the dress because I couldn't throw it away," she said with a faint smile. "Silly, right?" "No," Daniel said. "It's not silly." She finally looked at him. "You found the box, didn't you?" He hesitated. "I did." She nodded slowly, not angry, just thoughtful. "I guess it's time someone did." Silence filled the space between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Daniel could feel the weight of what she had carried all this time. Dreams packed away, names crossed out, and memories folded between the fabric of a dress that had never been worn. "It doesn't mean I want that life back," she said softly. "But part of me needed to believe it was still possible. That someday I'd stop being scared. That I could start again." Daniel reached for her hand. Not to fix anything, just to be there. "You don't have to rush," he said. "Someday can take its time." She looked down at their hands, then back up at him. And for the first time, she didn't hide. Her smile was quiet but real, and Daniel knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was the moment it finally started again. The evening after Daniel found the wedding box, something between them changed, but not in a bad way. If anything, the silence that used to sit between them like a wall began to feel more like a blanket, warm, soft, and shared. Marin didn't try to explain everything at once, and Daniel didn't ask for every detail. Instead, they started spending more time together, slowly, like someone learning to breathe again after holding it in too long. One weekend, Daniel invited her to the small music night held at the town's community center. It wasn't anything big, just a few people playing guitar, singing quietly, and sharing homemade snacks. "I don't really like crowds," Marin said, hesitating at the door. "It's not a crowd," he replied, "more like a bunch of people who forgot they were supposed to be shy." She laughed softly and followed him in. Inside, the lights were dim, the air smelled like coffee and cookies, and people were gathered in small groups. No one stared at her, no one asked questions. They just nodded politely or smiled gently. Marin relaxed a little. Daniel took out his guitar when it was his turn. He looked at her once before he began playing. Nothing dramatic, just a slow, gentle tune that filled the room like a memory. His fingers moved easily and his voice was low, smooth, almost like a whisper. Marin watched him from her chair, arms wrapped around her knees. And for the first time in a long while, she let herself feel everything. When the song ended, she clapped, quietly but with real feeling. "Was that for me?" she asked later. He smiled. "You tell me." That night, as they walked home, she told him a bit more. The man she had almost married wasn't a stranger. He had once been her best friend. They had grown up together. Everyone had said they were perfect for each other. "But sometimes," she said, "the people who seem the safest are the ones who make you feel the smallest." Daniel listened without speaking. "He didn't yell," she continued. "He didn't throw things. He just took pieces of me, little by little, told me I was too emotional, too quiet, too sensitive, told me I was lucky someone like him stayed." She paused, and I believed him. Daniel's heart ached, not just for what she said, but for how calmly she said it, like she had told herself this story so many times she didn't know how else to say it. "I packed the dress the day after I left him," she said, "not because I still wanted the wedding, but because I wanted to remember that I had chosen to leave, that I still had a future, even if it didn't look like the one I planned." He nodded slowly. "And that box is your reminder?" "Yes. That I didn't give up. I just chose me." They walked in silence for a while. The stars above them were bright, the air cool and still. "Why did you come here?" Daniel asked gently. Marin looked around at the trees, the houses, with their soft porch lights, the distant hum of crickets. "Because it was quiet," she said. "Because no one knew me. Because I needed to stop being the girl who almost got married and start being someone else." "And who are you now?" he asked. She looked at him, thoughtful. "I'm still figuring it out." In the following days, Marin opened up more. She shared pieces of herself in casual ways. She pointed out her favorite tree on the trail. She showed him old drawings she had packed in her suitcase. She talked about a story she once started writing but never finished. Sometimes she looked unsure while speaking, as if expecting judgment. But Daniel never rushed her. He listened. He cared. And little by little, her confidence grew. One afternoon, while having tea on her porch, Marin looked at him and said, "You know, I never planned to trust anyone again." "I get that," Daniel replied softly. "But then you didn't ask me to." He looked at her surprised. "You just let me exist," she added, "and that made me feel safe." He didn't know what to say to that, so he simply smiled and said, "You can always exist around me." She laughed, a real, open laugh, and for a moment everything felt light. But healing isn't always a straight line. One evening, as they were sitting by the lake watching the water shimmer under the moonlight, Marin grew quiet again. Her hands trembled slightly and her voice was barely a whisper. Sometimes I still hear his voice, she said. Not out loud, just inside, telling me I'm too much, or not enough. Daniel didn't interrupt. He placed his hand gently over hers. I know it's not true, she continued, but it's hard to unhear it. You don't have to fight those thoughts alone, Daniel said. You can talk to me, or we can just sit, whatever you need. She nodded, eyes glossy, with held-back tears, but she didn't cry, not that night. Later, as they walked back toward her cottage, Marin said something that made Daniel pause. I don't know what this is, she said, motioning between them, but I like it. I like you. He smiled. I like you too. She blushed and looked down. But I'm not ready for anything serious. That's okay, Daniel said. You're allowed to take your time. She looked up at him then, eyes full of quiet relief. Thank you. And just like that, the unspoken bond between them became something stronger. Not a promise, not a plan, but a beginning. A space they both agreed to share, gently, without pressure. A place to be honest. A place to heal. That night, Marin pulled the box labeled Someday from the back of her closet. She didn't open it, just placed it on her bedside table. Not because she was planning to wear the dress. Not yet, maybe not ever, but because it no longer felt like a symbol of what was lost. It had started to feel like something new, not a memory, a choice. Spring had come slowly to the little mountain town. The snow melted from the hills, and green shoots pushed up through the earth, reaching toward the warm sun. The days grew longer, and the air felt fresh and hopeful. Marin and Daniel had grown closer in the months since she arrived. Their friendship had blossomed gently, like the flowers in the fields around them, not rushed or forced, but natural and steady. One afternoon, Daniel invited Marin to a small gathering at his house. It wasn't a party, just a few neighbors, coming together to share food and stories. The idea was simple, to bring people together and make the town feel more like home. Marin was nervous at first. The thought of being around many people made her heart beat faster. But Daniel stayed by her side, offering quiet encouragement. When she arrived, the room was warm with laughter and friendly voices. People welcomed her with kind smiles and open hearts. As the evening went on, Marin started to relax. She listened to stories about the town's history, learned about local traditions, and even joined in singing an old folk song. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged. Somewhere, Daniel watched her with a smile. He could see the weight she had carried beginning to lift, replaced by something lighter, trust, perhaps, or hope. Later, when the guests had left, Daniel helped Marin tidy up. As they worked side by side, she spoke quietly. I never thought I'd be able to feel this way again, she said. Not after everything I've been through. Daniel nodded. You've been brave, more than you know. She looked at him, eyes shining. I'm ready to start making new plans. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Like what? Marin laughed softly. Maybe a real wedding someday, with people who want me to be happy. Not just a dress packed away in a box. He smiled and reached for her hand. I'd like to be there. Her smile grew wider. Me too. Over the next few weeks, the town seemed to sparkle with new energy. Marin became more involved, helping at the community center, joining in on weekend hikes, and even teaching a small art class for children. She found joy in simple things. The way sunlight filtered through the trees, the sound of birds singing in the morning, the taste of fresh bread from the bakery. One morning, as Daniel and Marin walked along the trail near the lake, she stopped, suddenly, and looked up at the sky. Do you remember that first day I came here? She asked. Daniel smiled. How could I forget? You looked like you were carrying the weight of the world. She laughed softly. I still feel like I am sometimes, but not like before. Not alone. He squeezed her hand gently. You're never alone now. As they walked, Marin shared more about her dreams, things she had put away long ago. A small art gallery, a book she wanted to write, a life filled with laughter and kindness. Daniel listened closely, excited by her plans. Let's make those dreams real. She nodded, feeling stronger than she had in years. Together. One evening, Daniel surprised Marin with a small gift. A photo album filled with pictures from the months they had spent together. Sunsets, hikes, shared meals, moments of quiet smiles. Here, he said. A new memory box. Marin opened it slowly, touched by the thoughtfulness. She looked up at him, eyes shining with tears she didn't try to hide. This is the first time I've looked forward to the future, she whispered. Daniel took her, hand in his, and they stood there in the warm light of the room, surrounded by pictures that told a story of healing, friendship, and new beginnings. The wedding dress was still tucked away in the box labeled Someday, but now it didn't feel like a symbol of pain or loss. It was a reminder of courage, the courage to leave behind what hurt her and to open her heart again. And maybe, just maybe, one day she would wear it. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because now she wasn't hiding anymore. She was ready. Ready to live, to love, and to be happy. With Daniel by her side, she knew that someday was no longer a distant dream. It was the very next step.